5 sinister sounds that reveal a witch's presence nearby. There's a reason your instincts spike when the air shifts and strange sounds creep into the quiet. These aren't just spooky tales from the edge of the firelight, they're ancient warnings, because throughout history, witches have never simply appeared. They've announced themselves, not with grand entrances, but with sounds that slither into your soul. Today, I'm going to reveal the 5 sinister sounds that signal a witch's presence near, by not to scare you, but to prepare you, because once you hear them, you can't unhear them. And you shouldn't if the wind starts whispering your name when no one's around. It ain't poetry, it's a presence. There's something unsettling about the wind when it starts to speak, not in the way it rustles leaves or rattles old windows, but when it slithers through the air with intention. It's no longer nature doing what nature does. It becomes something else entirely. You're standing there alone, and then you hear it, a whisper, faint, subtle, almost like a thought brushing against your eardrum. But it repeats, and then it says your name, not loudly, not clearly, but with enough weight to stop your heart cold. That's no ordinary wind. That's a presence using nature's breath as a mouthpiece. You see, the wind has always been a carrier of seeds, of storms, of omens. In ancient folklore, wind was believed to carry spirits, messages from the beyond, even curses. Witches have long been said to manipulate the wind, not just to fly, but to speak. Because sound, my friend, is one of the most underestimated weapons of the spiritual world. It bypasses the logic of your mind and goes straight to the soul. A whisper in the wind is not random, it's precision warfare. And if it's your name being spoken, you're being targeted. Now here's what's really sinister. This isn't just in stories or films. Cultures around the world, from the Scottish Highlands to the plains of Africa, from Native American legends to Eastern European grimoires, all have tales of wind-speaking names before someone falls ill, goes mad, or disappears. The name, once spoken by the wind, becomes an invitation, a thread pulled loose in the fabric of your spiritual shield, and the moment you hear it, if you listen without awareness, without armor, it's already started pulling at your essence. And don't think it's going to come in a dramatic gust. That would be too easy to recognize. No, this kind of wind is subtle. It sneaks in during still moments, when you're alone, when your guard is down. Maybe in your backyard, maybe walking down an empty road, maybe in your bedroom window late at night. You pause, thinking it was just your imagination, but then it comes again, a murmur, a sigh, that unmistakable cadence of your own name, laced with something dark. That's not a warning, that's an arrival. This kind of sound bypasses explanation. Your mind wants to rationalize it. Maybe it was the trees. You think, maybe the wind hit something just right. And sure, sometimes that's true. But when the atmosphere shifts, when the air suddenly feels heavier, when your skin tightens and your stomach drops, that's not coincidence. That's the signature of something that doesn't walk on legs but moves in vibrations. Something that doesn't knock on doors but finds its way in through sound. It's a witch marking your awareness, preparing the space, softening the resistance. Now here's what separates those who fall victim and those who stay free: awareness and authority. When you hear that whisper, you don't freeze, you don't ignore it, and you certainly don't answer. This is not a phone call, it's a trap. You respond with spiritual authority. You speak aloud if you have to. You declare your ground, you reject the invitation, because this kind of wind is always looking for a crack in your wall, and your response tells it whether you're a fortress or a welcome mat. But let's go deeper, because this isn't just about spooky moments in the dark. This is about being attuned to the sounds around you that aren't random. Some people live their whole lives with a witch's whisper in the background and never recognize it. It becomes part of the atmosphere. A low-level hum of fear, confusion, and unease. That's how it operates, by becoming so subtle, so constant, that you mistake it for your own thoughts. But once you know it's not you, once you know that that voice doesn't belong, you reclaim your soundscape. You reclaim your mind. In spiritual warfare, sound is one of the first battlegrounds. And when witches are nearby, and I'm not talking about the fairy tale kind, I'm talking about real spiritual manipulators, they don't come crashing in. They start with whispers, because if they can get into your hearing, they can start shaping your believing. And once they shape your beliefs, your actions follow. So the next time you're alone, and the wind seems to carry a voice that doesn't belong, don't dismiss it. And if that voice dares to say your name, stand up in your spirit. You were not made to be haunted, you were made to command. Don't let what slithers ride the wind settle in your soul. Expose it, expel it, and protect your atmosphere like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. When the fire crackles like it's laughing at you, you're not being warmed, you're being warned. Fire has always drawn people in. Its warmth, light, life. It's the heartbeat of every ancient gathering, the centerpiece of story, safety, and survival. But fire doesn't just burn what it speaks. And when that fire starts to crackle in a way that feels off, like it's responding to your presence, like it's laughing, that's when you stop warming your hands and start watching your back. Because what sounds like a comforting blaze might actually be a sinister broadcast. And if it's a witch nearby, trust me, she's not watching the fire with you, she's watching you through it. See, fire has a language, not just in metaphors, but in ancient belief systems. Fire has always been viewed as a portal. It reveals, it consumes, it communicates, and when witches work, fire is one of their most potent tools. Why? Because it's primal, it obeys intention, it responds to emotion. That's why a flame can rise or shrink without explanation, why it dances wildly one moment and stills the next. That's not random, that's resonance, energy meeting energy, and when the crackle turns rhythmic, irregular, when it sounds like breathless giggles or sarcastic snaps, it's not the logs talking, it's what's been invited into the flame. There are stories passed down through the ages of witches using fire to scry, to see, to send, to manipulate. In the dark corners of folklore, there are whispers of fire that speaks truths no one asked for, fire that reveals names never spoken aloud, fire that won't burn unless a curse is complete. And here's what's chilling, the sound of fire is one of their calling cards, because unlike the wind, which is subtle and seductive, fire is bold. It's confrontational, it gets your attention, but the danger is it pretends to be familiar. You trust it, you gather near it, you think it's serving you when really it may be studying you. So how do you know the difference? How do you know when the fire's crackle turns mocking? First, pay attention to the timing. Does the fire snap sharply right after you speak a name, think a thought, or feel fear? Does it pop repeatedly when no new wood has been added, when no wind is near, when everything else is still? That's not coincidence, that's interaction. Second, listen to the tone. A normal fire crackles at random, but a witch's fire, it has rhythm. It sounds like laughter with no mouth, like something hiding in the heat. And that sound doesn't warm you, it warns you. There's a reason cultures performed rituals around fire. It's not just light, it's portal. That's why witches gather around it, why spells are burned into ash, why paper and herbs are offered to the flame. Fire doesn't just destroy, it delivers. So when you sit around a fire and feel like something's off, don't ignore that intuition. That's not paranoia, that's discernment. Your spirit knows when the natural becomes supernatural. And if you feel watched through a flame, you probably are. You ever hear the phrase, playing with fire? That's not about matches, that's about energy, that's about intention, because fire responds to presence, and when a witch or any dark spirit uses fire, it's not for roasting marshmallows, it's for control, influence, surveillance. The crackle becomes a code, the warmth becomes a disguise. And the moment you lean in too far, you've already let something lean into you. Let me make this clear, I'm not saying every strange fire sound means you're cursed. But I am saying that spiritual warfare rarely announces itself in flashing neon lights. It comes in the sounds you dismiss. Crackles you think are cute, the chills you explain away, and that's exactly how witches like it, quiet, subtle, undetected, until it's too late, until you're carrying the weight of something you didn't invite because you didn't resist it. So what do you do when the fire starts sounding like it knows your secrets? You take your authority back. You declare that no spirit, no spell, no energy has the right to speak through the elements in your presence. You cleanse the space, you close the portal, because fire may burn, but it also obeys. You can command it to silence. You can cut the frequency, but only if you're aware that what you're hearing matters. The next time you sit by a fire and it starts talking back, don't just shrug it off. Don't just smile nervously and say, "That's weird." Tune in, pay attention, and if that laughter isn't coming from someone you can see, you better believe it's coming from someone you need to rebuke. Fire isn't always your friend. Sometimes it's the mask, sometimes it's the messenger, and sometimes it's the mouthpiece of a witch who's standing closer than you think. A rhythmic tapping with no source isn't background noise, it's a countdown to chaos. You ever hear a sound that doesn't belong? Not loud, not threatening, just consistent. A soft, steady tap, 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 repeating like a clock that's not yours. That sound has weight. It invades your awareness in a way that's too precise to be random and too soft to be obvious. You check the windows, you check the pipes, you check the roof, nothing but still tap, tap, tap. That's not your house settling. That's not a coincidence, that's a signal. Because when witches begin their work, they don't always roar in on broomsticks, sometimes they knock. And the sound you dismiss as background noise may be the very thing pulling your world apart one echo at a time. See, in the spiritual realm, rhythm matters. Repetition is how power is built. That's why chants repeat. That's why incantations loop. That's why drums are used in rituals to set tempo, to open portals, to align energy. And tapping, especially when it's steady, when it has timing, is a low-level, invasive frequency meant to disturb the atmosphere. It starts small, it seems harmless, but it's working. It's tapping into your space. It's testing your attention, it's setting a tone, and make no mistake when that tapping comes with no source. When it feels like it's inside the walls or just beyond the edge of hearing, that's not just sound. That's summoning. Let's call it what it is. Spiritual intrusion, and it's calculated. Because a witch doesn't need to break down your door if she can break down your peace. That tapping becomes a countdown. It builds tension, it creates unease, and the more you ignore it, the more it embeds itself in your environment. Before long, you're restless, distracted, anxious, and you don't even know why. You just can't sleep. Or you feel off. Meanwhile, something is tapping a rhythm behind the curtain of your reality, and it's not going to stop until the door swings open. Think about it. Tapping has long been used in superstitions as a sign of warning. 3 knocks in the night, a bad omen, tapping on the window, a death approaching. These aren't just old wives' tales, they're echoes of truth passed down through generations. Cultures all over the world share the same idea. When you hear a knock that wasn't made by a hand, you're not dealing with the natural anymore, you're being notified, and if you don't respond properly, you're not just a witness, you become a participant. Here's what makes it sinister. This kind of sound doesn't demand attention by volume, it demands attention by presence. You feel it. Even if you tell yourself it's nothing, your body responds, you tense. Your breathing changes, your ears strain for it. That's how it gets in. The moment it takes your focus, it opens a door, and if you don't know how to close it, that tapping becomes the background score to your unraveling. But the most dangerous part, the moment you accept it, the moment you let that sound live rent free in your space without challenge, without rebuke, without discernment, you've agreed to its presence. Even if you didn't mean to, because in the spiritual realm, passivity is permission, and a witch doesn't need you to believe in her. She just needs you to ignore her. Let me be clear, I'm not talking about creaky pipes or a squirrel on the roof. I'm talking about when the tapping is timed, when it happens in the same room at the same time, when it comes and goes like a scheduled visit, when you've ruled out every natural cause and yet it persists. That's not coincidence, that's communication. Something is knocking. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Because here's what you don't do. You don't answer it with curiosity. You don't play with it. You don't tap back. That's not cute. That's a contract. The moment you engage without authority, you validate the sound's purpose, and now it doesn't just knock, it walks in. So instead, you answer with command. You cleanse your space. You declare your home a place of light, not a landing zone for dark energy. You speak to the unseen and shut it down, because that tapping may have come looking for a crack, but you were not made to be cracked. You were made to stand. You've got to understand, tapping is only the beginning. It's the knock before the ritual, the footstep before the appearance, the countdown before the chaos. If you catch it early, if you recognize that sound for what it is, you can cancel the assignment before it unfolds. But if you let it continue, if you let it echo, it will build, it will grow, and before you know it, you're not just hearing things, you're seeing things, feeling things, losing things. So I'll say it again. A rhythmic tapping with no source isn't background noise, it's a countdown to chaos. And your job isn't to fear it. Your job is to confront it, because authority doesn't wait until things go wrong. Authority acts when the first knock hits, when the first tap echoes, when the first chill crawls up your back. That's not just a sound, that's a strategy, and you have the power to shut it down before the chaos walks through the door. When the silence suddenly stings, it's not peace, it's power being cloaked. There's a kind of silence that's wholly the kind that brings rest, stillness, and clarity. But then there's another kind, a silence that stings. You know the one. It doesn't calm you, it presses on you. It makes the hair on your neck rise, your breath hitch, your spirit retreat. You're in a room alone, nothing moves, nothing sounds, but somehow everything feels wrong. That's not stillness, that's strategy, because witches don't always come with thunder and noise. Sometimes they come wrapped in a silence so heavy it hums, so thick it feels like a blanket made of shadows, and in that moment you must understand, this isn't peace, it's power being cloaked. The spiritual realm understands the power of presence, and sometimes the most dangerous presence is the one you can't see or hear, but you feel. That sudden, unnatural silence is not the absence of sound. It's the suppression of everything holy, everything protective, everything that would normally be alive and active in your atmosphere. It's like someone has pulled the plug on the energy around you. The birds go quiet, the air goes still. Even your thoughts seem to dull, and yet your body is ringing, your instincts are screaming. That's not stillness, that's a witch's veil descending, a cloak of concealment woven from darkness, crafted to numb your awareness and mask an approach. You have to realize this. Silence is a tool, and in the hands of the wrong one, in the hands of a witch, it becomes a smokescreen. It isolates, it dulls your discernment, it lowers your defenses. Why do you think spells are so often cast in silence? Because noise disrupts, authority disrupts, but silence, it allows deception to grow, and the most dangerous spells are never the ones you see being cast. They're the ones you didn't even know were working. They were spun in the quiet, built in your blind spots, delivered while you were lulled into a false peace. The witch doesn't want to startle you. She wants to still you, make you slow, drowsy, inattentive. That kind of silence is anesthesia for the soul, numbing you before the knife comes down. Have you ever entered a room and suddenly felt suffocated, even though everything seemed normal? No odd smell, no movement, no noise, just a sharp, invisible weight pressing against your skin. That's the sting I'm talking about. That's how you know you're not just in a quiet place, you're in a contested one. Your spirit feels it before your ears do. That's why babies cry in certain rooms. That's why animals freeze or growl. That's why the atmosphere turns thick even though temperature hasn't changed, because in the spiritual realm, silence is never just silence. It's either divine stillness or demonic suppression. And when it stings, when it feels like you're being watched by something that won't announce itself, you're in the presence of something that thrives in secrecy. Witches and spiritual manipulators love this kind of silence. It's their operating table, their incubation chamber. In the middle of that silence, curses are planted, confusion is seeded, division is whispered into hearts. And if you're not alert, you'll mistake that feeling for just being tired, or just needing to clear your head, but what you're actually experiencing is an attempt to cloak darkness in calm, and once that cloak settles in, once your senses are dulled, the door is open for manipulation, you begin to second, guess your instincts, you withdraw, you isolate, and now you're vulnerable not because something loud entered your space, but because something silent shut it down. Don't get it twisted, not all quiet is peace, and not all peace is from God. That's why you've got to test the silence. Don't just accept it. Speak into it. Declare into it. If your voice trembles when you speak in a quiet room, if your declaration of authority feels resisted by the silence, that's your sign. You've entered a space where power is being cloaked, and that means you need to rise, not retreat, because what's been cloaked can't survive in confrontation. The second you bring light into it, the second you begin to praise, to pray, to command, that veil begins to tear. The sting of silence is a warning system for the spiritually awake. It's the moment you feel everything shift even though nothing moved. That's not paranoia, that's perception. And ignoring that sting can cost you, because the enemy always works best in silence, not just because it hides him, but because it hides you from the truth. In the wrong silence, revelation shuts down, dreams are interrupted, clarity disappears, and all that remains is confusion. That's not accidental, that's spiritual architecture designed to dismantle you without a sound. You must learn to confront these moments, not with fear, but with fire. You walk into that stinging silence and own the atmosphere. You don't adjust to the quiet, you break it. Declare truth, sing, speak life. Call out what's cloaked, because authority breaks the stillness. It rattles the things that want to stay hidden. It exposes the shadows trying to wrap themselves around you like a fog, and once you confront the silence, it loses its power, because it was never silence, it was strategy, and strategy folds when it's revealed. This is how witches work, not just through curses and potions, but through manipulation of environment, through sensory control, through atmosphere distortion. They can't stop your spirit, but they'll try to dull it, mute it, put it to sleep, and silence is their favorite lullaby, but not for you, because now you know, now you recognize the sting, and next time it comes, next time that silence presses in and tries to convince you it's peace, you won't sit still. You won't be lulled, you'll rise up and speak into it, because power doesn't always shout. But it never hides, and you weren't made to be still in the presence of evil. You were made to shake the silence with truth. The whisper that mimics your name isn't curiosity, it's a trap being baited. There's a line no one teaches you, but you feel it when you cross it, that invisible boundary between the natural and the supernatural. And often, you don't cross it with your feet, you cross it with your ears. It starts with a whisper, a sound so faint, so feather-light, it makes you doubt you even heard it. But it says your name, not out loud, not bold, familiar, like someone you know, like someone you trust. It doesn't shout, it doesn't echo, it slips into the silence like it belongs there, and the moment you hear it, that whisper, that mimic, everything inside you shifts, your stomach tightens, your breath catches. Because that sound didn't come from a person, it didn't come from a room, it didn't come from anything you can see. That whisper wasn't curiosity, it was a trap being baited. Let's get this clear. When something speaks your name without a voice box, it's not interested in friendship, it's interested in access. Your name is not just a label, it's a key. In the spiritual realm, names hold weight, identity, power. That's why blessings are spoken over names and curses are spoken through them. To name something is to know it. And when a witch or dark spirit whispers your name in mimicry, it's not trying to get your attention, it's trying to gain permission. That whisper is a test, a probe, a spiritual knock disguised as a voice you trust. Because if it can get you to answer, to follow, to agree it's in, it doesn't need to break the door down, it just needs you to open it. And it doesn't always sound creepy. Sometimes it sounds like your mother, your best friend, a sibling. Sometimes it calls to you in a tone so familiar, so normal. You feel foolish questioning it, but that is the trick. That's how manipulation moves. It hides in the sounds we trust. And witches, spiritual manipulators, dark forces, they know this. They use mimicry as a weapon, not to terrify you, to trick you, because if they can sound like someone you love, you'll lean in when you should be walking away. You'll listen when you should be silencing. You'll open when you should be shielding. Understand this. A whispered name in an empty room isn't a glitch in your hearing. It's not just your imagination. That's a summons. You are being baited to respond spiritually, emotionally, energetically, because once you respond, once you say what or who's there, or even just turn toward it, you've engaged, you've acknowledged. And that's all it needs. See, in spiritual warfare, attention is agreement, focus is fuel. The moment you lend your awareness to something dark, especially if it's masking as something known, you feed it. You charge it, you empower it to stay. This tactic is ancient. Go back through mythology, folklore, and even scripture. The enemy has always used mimicry. Serpents don't scream, they suggest. They speak in voices that bend truth just enough to pull you off course. And witches, real ones, don't just cast spells with potions and powders. They cast them with sound, with suggestion, with mimicked frequencies. They study you, they listen, they wait, and then they whisper, not just into rooms, but into minds. Into dreams, into atmospheres, and if you don't recognize the trap, you'll walk into it willingly. Here's what you've got to catch. That whisper that says your name doesn't want your attention, it wants your agreement. It wants you to welcome what's not of God. It wants you to treat something spiritually invasive like it's emotionally familiar. That whisper doesn't love you, it hunts you. It studies your patterns, your loneliness, your vulnerabilities. And it speaks just when you're weak enough to listen, late at night, in moments of grief, when you're mentally exhausted. That's when it creeps in and says your name like it's a comfort, but it's actually a command. You might think it's just a sound, but that sound carries intent. Sound is spiritual technology. It's not just vibration, it's information. And when that sound mimics your name, it's not passive. It's probing your defenses. It's checking your awareness, it's mapping your resistance. If you answer it even with confusion, you signal openness. You give it a thread to follow. That's why, after that whisper, you might start to feel watched. Drained, anxious, you didn't just hear something weird. You heard a knock from something that wanted in, and you almost opened the door. So what do you do when it happens? You don't respond with questions. You don't try to reason with the whisper, you respond with authority, you speak aloud, you take back the space, you say, any spirit that is not of the light, you are not welcome here. You make your space a no-fly zone for deception. You cut the frequency, because if it can reach you once, it'll try again. And if you play with it, if you treat spiritual mimicry like a game, you'll find yourself entangled in a net that was always meant to trap, not test. This isn't just about witches hiding in shadows. It's about spiritual hijacking. You can be living your life, walking in peace, and suddenly find yourself under mental and emotional warfare, all because you gave one whisper too much room. That's how subtle it starts. That's how quietly it builds. And before long, your sleep is disrupted. Your focus is fragmented. You start feeling disconnected from people, from purpose, because something called your name and you didn't cut the connection. But not anymore, because now you know that whisper wasn't innocent, it wasn't a mistake, it was an invitation masked as a memory, and next time it comes, next time it slides into your space and says your name in a way that feels familiar but smells like deception, you'll shut it down. Not with fear, with fire, with discernment, with boldness, because that whisper may try to sound like something you once loved, but you're not the same person anymore. You don't follow echoes, you walk in truth. You don't answer calls that don't come from the throne. You guard your name like your life depends on it, because spiritually it does.